Fragile Frogs, from The Frog Scientist by Pamela S. Turner. Amphibian scientists are like everybody else. They like to talk about what they do. At an international conference in 1989, nearly everyone was telling the same story. There seemed to be fewer amphibians, frogs, toads, salamanders, and caecilians. Each scientist thought it was happening just to the animals he or she studied. But when the scientists talked to one another, they realized it was happening everywhere. Concerned scientists surveyed amphibian populations all over the world. They discovered that about a third of amphibians, 1,856 out of 5,743 species, are threatened with extinction. Since 1980, at least 122 species have probably become extinct. Australia had a remarkable species called the gastric brooding frog. The mother frog swallowed her eggs and hatched her babies in her stomach. The little eggs hopped from their mother's mouth into the big wide world. During the 1980s, the Australian gastric brooding frogs disappeared. Amphibian means double life. Most amphibians begin their life in a watery world, breathing through fish-like gills. Then they transform into an entirely different creature, an air-breathing animal. Something similar happened in Costa Rica. Golden toads once lived in Costa Rica's cool, wet forests. The males of the 2-inch-long species were golden orange, like web-footed tangerines. They gathered by the hundreds during breeding season. The golden toad was the last seen in 1989. Like the gastric brooding frog, the golden toad is now considered extinct. No one knows what killed the gastric brooding frogs or the golden toads. Habitat loss is a big problem for many wild animals, including amphibians. Frogs, toads, and salamanders die when wetlands are drained, ponds are filled, or forests are cut down. Sometimes amphibian habitat is fragmented, chopped into smaller pieces, when roads, houses, or shopping centers are built. Imagine a tiny frog trying to hop safely across a freeway or a parking lot. To the right, this red-legged walking frog from Africa looks like he's wearing tiger-striped underwear. Walking frogs take steps with their hind legs instead of hopping. Scientists looked closely at places where amphibians were declining. To their surprise, they found it wasn't always where habitat was being lost or fragmented. Frogs were disappearing from protected areas, or places very far from humans. Costa Rica's golden toad lived in a national park. The gastric brooding frog lived in remote parts of Australia. To the right, the only golden toads left are museum specimens like this one. The species is believed to be extinct. Sonoran desert toad. Deformed frogs appeared too. In 1995, middle school students in Minnesota found some frogs near a farm. They were juvenile leopard frogs, just like the ones Tyrone studies. Dr. Tyrone Hayes is a biologist discussed in the trade books, The Frog Scientist. See the complete work for more information. Many of the Minnesota frogs had missing legs or shriveled legs, or legs that didn't bend. It was strange and scary. People began finding deformed frogs in many other places too. What is happening to the world's amphibians? The answer isn't simple. Amphibian decline has many causes. Since the 1980s, the chytrid, pronounced kit-rid, fungus has spread around the world. The disease is killing amphibians in North America, Central America, South America, and Australia. To make matters worse, global warming seems to cause temperatures that help the fungus spread. Those scientists in New Zealand believe they've discovered a chemical that kills the fungus. Finding and treating wild frogs would be very difficult. To the left, blue poison dart frogs live in South America. Below, this leopard frog was caught by a child in Reedsburg, Wisconsin. It has an extra leg growing out of its chin. Other deformed frogs were found in the same place. A deadly fungus that threatens frogs was first discovered in the blue poison dart frog above, and White's tree frog. White's tree frog is found in Australia. Some species of frogs living at high altitudes are threatened by ultraviolet radiation. Man-made chemicals have thinned the ozone layer in our atmosphere. The Earth's ozone layer keeps most of these damaging UV rays from reaching us. At high altitudes, the air is thinner, and if thin air is combined with a thin ozone area, even more UV radiation reaches the Earth. High levels of UV radiation can kill the delicate, shellless eggs of amphibians that live in mountain areas. Amphibians are also threatened by introduced species. An introduced species is a creature that shows up somewhere it isn't normally found. The bullfrog, a kind of frog that isn't declining, is native to the eastern and midwestern parts of the United States. It has been introduced by humans into ponds and streams all over the West. Introduced bullfrogs gobble up smaller native frogs and take over their habitat. Sometimes fish are introduced into lakes and streams, so fishermen will have something to catch. The non-native fish usually have a taste for native tadpoles. Often a frog species faces not just one threat by many, but many. California's red-legged frog has been hit by a truckload of problems: habitat loss, fungal disease, and introduced bullfrogs and fish. And if all that weren't enough, red-legged frogs are also killed by pesticides sprayed on crops in California's Central Valley. The pesticides are blown by the wind into the foothills where many of the remaining frogs live. And those scary frog deformities? Scientists found that some frog deformities are caused by a parasite. The parasite is a worm that burrows under a tadpole's skin and disrupts the tadpole's growth. It may prevent a leg from growing or cause deformed legs. Pesticides, such as atrazine, make frogs more vulnerable to parasites. And pesticides can also cause strange frog deformities. Sometimes those deformities aren't as obvious as missing or shriveled legs. Yet hidden deformities can still harm frogs. That's what Tyrone found when he tested frogs exposed to atrazine. Bullfrogs are very aggressive and prey on other frogs. Like all amphibians, bullfrogs are cold-blooded. That means the temperature inside their body changes as the outside temperature changes. Below, a Bell's horned frog gulps down a newborn mouse. Below, it is sometimes called the Pacman Frog after the munching video game creature. Instead of chasing its prey, the Pac-Man sits and waits like a web-footed couch potato.